mum doesn't go, I'm a refugee. Like,
Of course.
my mum is like, my mum's my mum, or or at work she's Eva, she's the hairdresser, and she's Hungarian and she's Australian.
Yeah.
And my dad was the same.
Yeah.
He's super proud, and proud that he brought up a family and loved soccer and whatever. You're not just, it's not. Absolutely.
It doesn't define you. Yes.
No, absolutely. And that's it. I like stories that celebrate that. I am fascinated of where people have come from and what's shaped a person. We've all been, I think, influenced or shaped by someone or something.
You're listening to Who Is My Neighbour, a podcast by You Belong Australia. Each episode, you'll join with Sorgel and Warren to meet some of Australia's newest neighbours. You'll hear their stories, listen to their hopes and dreams, and discover the incredible courage and inspiration they bring to our communities and richly diverse Australian culture. You'll also learn from some more established Aussies too, and the joy they've found living and working alongside our refugee and migrant background neighbours.
Hi, thanks for joining us for another episode of Who Is My Neighbour. Today we're going to talk with Jude, who is an independent film producer, and we're going to hear a little bit about her story and her involvement and some of the stories that she's heard in her filmmaking, people who have come to Australia from different countries and different backgrounds. So that should be really exciting.
Yeah, hope you enjoy listening to her story.
Hello, Jude. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your own experiences with refugees.
Well, I'm a child of refugees. Both my parents are refugees from Hungary. My dad escaped after World War II by himself, and my mum escaped with her family during the Revolution.
Okay.
So I was born in Australia, but I guess I grew up as an Australian Hungarian, I suppose.
Wow. So how old were your parents when they
my dad was 18 when he escaped, and he has an amazing story about how he escaped, and he was shot in the head and survived, and
my goodness.
Was on a boat, or actually long story, but came to Australia and started working for what is now known as BHP Steel.
Yes.
And my mum came with her family. She was 12 or 13, I think.
Yeah.
And her story, I'm actually only just learning my mum's story now.
Yeah.
I think because my dad was a big personality, he had a pretty epic story. He got shot in the head, like I said. He was working on a farm, and the French Foreign Legion gave him a job. So he always had these cool stories we knew about.
Yeah.
But my mum's got just an amazing story as well. But she came with her family. Right.
So you were born here.
Yes.
Did you, as you were growing up, what was that experience like? Were you like a child? Did you have a sense of I'm a child of a refugee or a child of a migrant, or were you just?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Like, I was very cognizant of that. I wasn't like all the Aussie kids at school. But I think it's only now, in recent years, I've worked with a lot of displaced or refugees in my career, and I think it's only now that I'm starting to realise what that was, and how much I think at times that I took for granted.
Yeah.
And maybe even sometime I was ashamed because I wanted to be like all the other kids in class, and I knew I wasn't like the other kids.
So you were identifying as Hungarian and
Australian. Yes, definitely.
And this is how you lived your childhood, and then after that teenage life.
Yeah, I kind of knew that because, we did things that Hungarians do, and we ate, food that Hungarians eat. Mm-hmm. But then I was going to an Australian school. I was born in Sydney. I spoke Australian. I don't know. But, and I'd be in class with a lot of kind of quintessential Australian kids, and I think, you know, I'd be like, oh, for a long time I wasn't sure which one I was, or
sure.
you know, and then I think it's being older I realise I love that I have both cultures, and I grew up with a great blend of culture. You know, my only regret is I think when I was younger I was a little bit ashamed that my parents had an accent, you know, and my friends at school couldn't understand my mum and dad. You know, but I think, wow, like I was just a kid, I didn't know much, whatever. You know, my regret is I didn't learn Hungarian.
Okay.
So the language at home wasn't Hungarian?
It was both. I understand Hungarian. But I speak very little of it. We did start going to school, but I rebelled and didn't want to, and you know, and I think I really regret that.
Yes.
But when I was 21, I went to Hungary and I got to see where both my parents grew up, and that was just so amazing. And in that time, I met so my dad, because he escaped by himself, all of his family were from Hungary.
Okay.
Whereas Mum's family I had met. And I look like my dad. I have similar features, but yet I don't really look like Mum's side of the family.
Okay.
So meeting, you know, all kind of, you know, we all look similar. And because I could understand Hungarian, I started speaking a bit of Hungarian, and it was great, but I've lost it.
So how did you feel? Like, I'm so curious to know how you felt when you went back to where your parents are from. Did you feel belong to that part of the world that you were not born there?
Yes and no. I think it was really, like, it was such an amazing experience. I was 20 at the time, and it was surreal to see this is where my parents grew up. Like, this was my dad's house. You know, and like, to try to even understand. Again, I don't think I've really come to full understanding of the life that they had to escape from, because Dad was World War II, and Mum was kind of during the fall of Stalin. So, you know, I didn't grow up like that at all.
No.
I have no idea what my parents went through when they were my age or younger. So to go there and to sort of see these homes, like my dad's house at one point was taken over by the army, and he had some pretty hectic stories about that, and to see his house and to think my dad lived here with members of an army, you know, with soldiers.
How many soldiers?
You know, and
wow.
You know, and it was a little bit volatile, and that to think what, you know, and you know, I'm there, and it's now a free country, and you know, so amazing. I think it was bizarre, but on a different level, I look like a Kalman. I look like all the Kalmans, you know, and to meet cousins for the first time, to meet aunties and uncles for the first time, going, wow,
we actually are.
We're nothing like the same. So, it was really cool. I loved it.
That's amazing. So, Jude, you are a film producer.
I am, yes.
You know, when I was a kid, that was like my dream job, to get into movies.
Me too.
Well, I never did it. So tell us what it's really like.
Well, I'm an independent filmmaker, they call me. So that means I'm really bottom of the barrel.
Oh, yes.
I've had a great career. I have worked on Hollywood films, but not for a long time now. I don't know. It's really diverse. The stuff that I kind of do these days is obviously either low budget or independent.
Sure.
But it's so cool. I love storytelling. Yeah. I love being behind a camera. I love using my craft. I like the technical side as well as the storytelling side. It's definitely a diverse industry. When I was younger, again, I used to work on big films.
Yes.
And big films are awesome because big films are big sets and famous people and, you know, and recognisable sets. I worked on Scooby-Doo when it was shot on the Gold Coast almost 20 years ago now.
Wow.
I think 20 years. And I remember thinking it was such a big, you know, I met some really famous people and I remember thinking this is so cool. Yeah. You know, and it is so cool.
So I should have stuck with my dream. Is that what you're saying?
There you go. Yes, I suppose, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely diverse, you know, and especially these days, the landscape's changed. I mean, wow, we're doing a podcast that's going to be on YouTube and, you know, lots of people will watch it. So I love it because it is quite a diverse industry.
Sure.
And at one point, you know, I actually think it might have been Blair Witch Project really changed things in the industry. It made independent filmmakers got a really, you know, got noticed and became good competitors to the big budget films. So I love it because it's, you never know where you're going to end up.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Jude, you said that you're interested in storytelling. Obviously, that's your career of making films. What type of stories are you more interested in and making films about?
Yes, I love people stories. I think people are amazing.
Yeah.
I have recently done a lot of stories around displaced people and refugees. And I think because my parents, you know, I keep thinking of my parents when I'm interviewing. I was in Nigeria a few years ago and I was speaking to all sorts, a lot of different people. It's kind of the way I will start making a doco. I'll just sort of interview and find out what's the story, what's happening on the ground, and for this particular story. And I remember thinking, wow, these people had escaped. They had actually escaped from the Boko Haram. So pretty intense stories as well. But I remember coming back home thinking, wow, did my parents, different level, but they certainly came from conflict. You know, what had they seen? What had they survived? You know, again, because I grew up, I feel like I almost grew up in a bubble.
Yeah.
You know, and although Dad shared a lot of stories, I don't know if I understood the fullness of it.
Yeah.
So I love telling stories that you don't often hear.
Yep.
You know, and see. Actually, last night I had dinner with a lady who had watched the documentary I did in Nigeria, and she said, wow, I'd never seen a documentary like that because I sort of knew what was going on in the news, but to hear what it's actually like and to hear from people, you know, who have lived through those kind of experiences. And I thought, oh, wow, thank you, because that's what I want to do. I actually want to use my skill set to tell someone else's story.
Sure.
If that makes sense, you know.
You're learning a lot about your parents by
I know.
stories wow.
I feel like I keep coming back to my parents because I think, wow, like, gee whiz, there's not, there's so much similarity. I did another project a few years ago and it was with a lot of refugees on the Gold Coast and immigrants, and it was a sort of women's based program. And my mum came to the kind of launch of the story, and again all these women started talking to mum who were new to our country, trying to get a job, and I could hear my mum telling them, kind of encouraging them, saying, just do, you know, just keep working hard, or, you know, plugging away. Because again, she came here when she was younger, but she started her hairdressing career and is to this day a hairdresser.
Wow.
You know, and it was really cool just hearing. And I thought, wow, again, there's, you know, although it's generation, you know, there's years, decades gone by, there's a lot of similar stories. So I think, oh, wow, you know.
So tell us about your latest project that you're starting work with.
So the latest project that I'm really sort of learning so much about actually is with the Yazidi people from northern Iraq.
Yes.
And right now I met Tim Buxton from You Belong and just like was shocked and stunned by his story and kind of his adventures.
Yes. And
I thought, wow, like I'm also working on a project with the South Sudanese community in Melbourne.
All right.
And at one point in our doco, that still hasn't, we're just kind of got a bit of shooting to do and a bit of post-production. But the language we were using, that they were the newest refugees. And then I learned, well, hold on.
Actually,
that's not true. So my ears popped up and I went, well, who are our new neighbours?
Okay.
Wow.
And so I suppose that really is in
Fascinating.
pre-production.
Sure.
But,
Okay.
and I'm just learning. Actually, I just interviewed a guy and he was saying, so what do you think of the Yazidi community in Toowoomba? And I said, I don't think anything. I'm learning. I'm learning about you guys. So, yeah.
Jude, I'm sure that you've listened and you're listening to so many refugee and displaced people's stories. Some of the stories might be like very tragedy, like, you know, they're sharing the difficulties. But I'm sure there is something that they share, which is hope.
Oh.
And which is something we talk about in this podcast. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm in awe of people who have survived like hardship, and a lot of people that I have had the privilege of sitting down and talking to have shared, you know, very traumatic experiences and hard that I can't even imagine. Yeah, you know, and yet I'm amazed by their resilience, their wisdom, their kindness. Yeah, like I think, wow, what an amazing human being to have survived that and to continue. And I'm sure it's not even easy. You know, I'm in awe. I don't know what else to say, like because I sort of think to myself, wow, would I be stuck? You know, if something that bad happened to me, where would I be, kind of thing. Yeah. You know, so but a lot more times than not, people, you know, they still love their families. They still do laugh. They still want, you know, good for their family. A lot of people I've interviewed, say a sort of older generation who've come to Australia, have all said they've come here for their family, for their children. Yeah. And again, I think that makes me think, wow, my mum and dad, they did that for me. You know, you know, maybe mum didn't think of that when she was 12, but, you know, their future, they were thinking of their future, you know, and they wanted to, unfortunately, they couldn't stay, you know, in their homeland, and they wanted a better future. And I think that's something consistent that I've heard in the people I've interviewed. I don't know about you guys. Yeah.
So what do you focus in your films that you're making about refugees? Do you just like listen to the trauma they have been through, or more about what they are doing in their life at the moment? I'm a former refugee, and when I talk about my story, I don't like to talk about what I've been through. I like to share what I'm doing these days for my future and people around me.
Yes, well, definitely this next project that I'm embarking on, that's what I want to do. You know, I want to, exactly that. You aren't just one thing or one day that might be a defining moment for you, but who are you as a person? Who are, you know, what makes you tick, you know? It's like life is full of colour, isn't it? It's good and bad, and it's all, you know, and I think I really like stories that share, again, human stories where it's like, oh, where did you come from? Where are you now? Where are you going, I suppose?
Yeah, I guess it feels good when a refugee or a person who have been through difficult times talk about what they are doing these days, like what really the hope that they aim for, or the goals that they are aiming for. The person, I feel like, would feel better talking about what they are doing, like just hearing yourself talking about yourself in this way.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Definitely. I think, you know, like my mum doesn't go, I'm a refugee. Like,
of course.
My mum is like, my mum's my mum. Or, you know, or at work, she's Eva, she's the hairdresser. And she's Hungarian and she's Australian. Yeah. You know, and my dad was the same. Yeah. He's super proud, like, you know, and proud that he brought up a family and, you know, loved soccer and whatever, you know, you're not just, it's not absolutely.
It doesn't define you. Yes.
No, absolutely. And that's it. I like stories that celebrate that. I am fascinated of where people have come from and what's shaped a person. You know, we've all been, I think, you know, been influenced or shaped by someone or something. So, you know,
That's so exciting to hear for so many Australians, I'm sure, would have a similar kind of response. The Yazidis, who are they?
Yes.
Unless they happen to have one living next door, because they are quite real. You know, the people in our community right next door. And I guess that's part of what we're trying to do as a podcast, actually introduce people to, let me introduce you to your neighbour.
Yeah, and I guess it's that time when the person is not a refugee anymore, or not Aussie, Yazidi, whatever, a person, a human being who is sharing their stories.
Absolutely, for sure. That's it. Yep. Like, we all, I think, you know, for me, I've had the privilege of traveling a lot. And I'm always surprised. Culture is awesome. I love culture. I love food. I love different food.
That helps, doesn't it?
but there's always like this humanity. There's something beautiful in humanity, you know, where it's like, we still laugh. We love and hate our families. You know, there's... you know, and I think that's great. If we can celebrate, you know, our differences and find, hold on, we're all human.
Exactly. We get to learn from the differences we have in every culture, or as people.
Exactly
right.
Exactly right.
Absolutely. I love it. It makes life better. And I think you know, going back to growing up, I feel like I'm like, oh wow, what a silly kid I was, to almost be ashamed of you know, my parents' heritage and my heritage. Whereas now I just think, wow, I'm stoked, you know, that I have that. And, you know, I have stepsons now who are total, like, Australian kind of heritage. Yet, you know, we're just learning about, and, you know, we eat all sorts of food. I mean, gosh, we eat sushi. We eat, you know, my husband said the other day, isn't it great? Like, you know, because... The food of the world is in our backyard.
It's very
so
true.
You know, it's things like
Jude,
that.
I'm so excited to hear some more of these stories, and I'm so glad that you're so passionate about capturing these stories, because they're the stories I think that really help all of us to understand all these different people, all intrinsically the same. We're all people. Different paths, different backgrounds, but different futures, different hopes. And I can't wait to see this next one as well. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I love what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
It's good to have conversations like this and just, like, learn about all different sorts of people. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. You.
Wow, we just heard from Jude and all that work that she's doing in the telling stories through film. That was fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Especially when she talked about her background and where her parents came from. I mean, even she hasn't lived here in Australia as a refugee or a former refugee, but she still could reflect on like how her parents lived the life here as refugees, and how she, like, do you know what? I think when a person comes from different background, or like Australian or another background, they still can feel they belong to wherever they come from. So that's exactly what Jude was talking about, and it's just amazing to listen to her talking.
I loved when she talked about her mum, and when her mum was talking with fairly recent refugees. She had been a refugee much younger in her life, and it was almost as if, like, she was able to pass on her knowledge and experience like a mum would do for any of her children. It was amazing to think that even out of all that hardship and the difficulty that she obviously would have experienced as a 12 or 13-year-old, picked up and taken to another country in difficult circumstances, she's able to actually use that experience to encourage others and to help others. I think that's fabulous.
And look where she comes from. I mean, the background, the family, and the work that she's doing nowadays. And she has been doing, making films about refugees, displaced people. She mentioned about doing that film in Nigeria.
Yes, just opening her eyes. And the good thing is now she's capturing that on film, so that other people's eyes can be opened as well.
She's showing the world who these people are, and just getting, you know, a platform and being able to share these stories, something that we are aiming to do here in our podcast, sharing the stories of these people.
Absolutely.
Getting other people to listen to their stories is just amazing.
Yeah. The other thing from Jude's story that I remember really clearly, because it's something from my own background, my own educational background, where Jude was saying, that she regrets that she didn't learn to speak Hungarian. There's been a lot of debate in the community about whether refugees and former refugees and migrants and people from a different language background, whatever their circumstances, whether they should teach their children their native language or whether that will somehow disadvantage them at school. And it's interesting to hear Jude's side of the story. I wish I had learned.
Exactly.
And certainly as academics in that field, what we always say is teach your children their native tongue. Right?
I know what you're talking about.
That's what we say, because our understanding is children are quite capable of learning 2 or more languages, and it captures more of a richness of their heritage and also has lots of other benefits as well. What's your thought on that?
When I grew up in a family where the main language was Kurdish.
Okay.
We all speak different languages, but the main language is always Kurdish whenever we communicate.
Yeah.
And I have 2 little cousins here in Australia, and sometimes, they're just little, you like to speak English with them because they're learning at school.
Yeah.
And sometimes I regret doing that
Yeah.
because I want them to learn their first language.
Yeah.
Because they're going to learn English at school with friends outside of the house anyway.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
it just adds something from their background to them.
Yes.
And also gives them a chance to learn their mother language.
That's right. And
so and
it's a precious thing. Language is a part of culture, just like culture is a part of language. And to be able to maintain that as part of the heritage. And it would be such a shame if generations later the Yazidi community was saying, I wish I had. So I personally will be encouraging mums and dads and grandmas and grandpas and aunties and uncles to be speaking Kurdish Kamanji with their children.
Yeah, and this is what making us in Australia a multicultural community where we come from different cultures, we speak different languages. So how great it would be to pass those languages to the next generation.
Exactly right, yeah. And how exciting that we're going to have a new movie coming out.
Yes.
I'm not sure when, it's only in pre-production.
Can't wait to watch and listen to all these stories.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yep.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this podcast and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Who is My Neighbour? To learn more about the work of You Belong Australia, just head to youbelong.org.au and find out all the ways you can get involved and empower refugees to integrate and thrive. Lastly, would you help support this podcast simply by sharing it with others? You can also write a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or subscribe to us on YouTube. Yes, we are a video podcast as well. Well, thanks again for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Who is My Neighbour?